Hi, my name is Steve Blodgett. I live here in Ogden, Utah. I've been model railroading for pretty much all my life. I even have a picture to prove it. This picture is me probably in 1948. Notice, I'm happy as long as I have a train, and I'm unhappy when I don't. This railroad is about time period 1875 to 1880. As you can see, the old mining towns and western towns and stagecoaches and horses. The room size is 28 by 12. The track is all hand laid. When we made the original plan, it was really just a dog bone and everything else was added on after that. I like to build buildings, as you'll see, and weather, and I try to make things look like they were in the 1870s. One of the trains that you'll be following around my railroad is a 480 made by Mantua way back in the 70s. And I don't think there was a lot of them made, and it was given to me. And this is how it turned out. But this is how it looked when I first got it, just parts. And the idea here is, and one of the things that I enjoy, is that you can, with relatively inexpensive parts, you can make your own locomotives and they look halfway decent. They may not be exactly prototypical, but they serve the purpose. Now I put detail parts all around, redid the motor, and put in a new decoder. So all of that, and you come out with a pretty good locomotive. And you'll see that it works pretty well as it runs around my layout. So keep that in mind when you're out looking at swap meets or garage sales of what you can pick up relatively cheap and then what you can do with it. The first area here is our major town on the railroad. You notice it's not finished. That's great because it gives me a few years of great modeling to do in the future. So the representation will be the main part of the town here in the lower part, and then up on the hill will be all the Victorians where all the rich people live. It's all kit bashed and kit buildings. I like to build buildings and weather them and make little detailed scenes. If you notice the station here, that's the second Union Station in Ogden, Utah. The first ones were just wooden structures. This building was built in the 1890s and it burned down in 1920. But my great friend, Alan McCallum, made this station. And when he passed away, I just kind of had to have it to remember him by. So we placed it here in this town, and it looks the part for my railroad. As you can see, the track is all hand laid, and I have plenty of work to do in this scene, so it'll give me, as I said, years of model railroading, which I'm happy to do. As the train leaves the scene, you'll notice the tunnel portal, which was scratch built, and it's modeled after a tunnel portal that was between Ogden and Evanston. As you notice, the train came out of the tunnel and there's about 15 feet of railroad. As it travels along, we end up going down a river canyon, and it crosses a creek 2 times. The first bridge is a combination kit bash and scratch built. If you notice, the pylons are all individual castings, and we have a fisherman and they're being spied on by a moose. Also notice the overhang in the rockwork. That was taken from a picture in a narrow gauge magazine out of Colorado that I kind of copied, so I apologize to all the narrow gauge fans. The train travels along the creek, and then we meet another bridge that's scratch built that goes over the creek. Again, all of the pylons and retaining walls or individual castings, and then we pull up to a water tank. Pump house has a pipe that goes from the pump house down into the river to make the scene more complete. As our Central Pacific train leaves the filling station at the water tank, we pass a Bear River 440 ready to head down canyon. Then as the train progresses even further, we pass our mine scene where we have the mine buildings and a lot of cribbing, and I modeled those after Colorado mines. If you look at pictures of narrow gauges in Colorado, you see the cribbing and the up on that mines on the hill, and I tried to take in that aspect. We do have a derelict mine shaft on the far end. In an unfinished scene, I want to do a tram that comes off to the side, and there is a washout that may be developed more. There's a wagon train with mules and miners and all the gear that they need, but it's being held up by a skunk family. That stinks. As we cross an unfinished bridge, it's the only piece of flex track I have on the railroad for now. This is my winter project. Unfortunately, it's been my winter project for about 10 years, but we'll get to it one of these days. The rock work behind, that's all unfinished too. It needs a lot more brush and trees. And this is a photo of what this scene will look like in the future after I finish the model. As we continue up canyon, we pass over a small creek with a small trestle and a miner's cabin. And then we enter a nice cut. And then we take on water. If you notice the canyon, it's at the end of a peninsula, and there's a view block that makes you have to look down canyon or up canyon. After we take in water and we continue up canyon, we also cross another trestle with a lot of retaining walls and blocks again. And then we go into another canyon and we fade out of the scene through a nice tunnel portal. As our Central Pacific locomotive comes out of the tunnel and we pull into the station at the fictitious town of Hartwell, it seems like a good time to talk about this town and its existence, although as you notice, it's not finished. Most of the buildings are kits, weathered, and I try to detail as much as I can. I like to paint buildings, and I like to add figures and all of the freight and things that people would have in a town, such as brooms, wheels, and just to clutter the whole place up. There's probably 60 horses in this town right now. I use a lot of Jordan wagons or any manufacturers that I can get of the time period. But if you notice, the horses all have their heads in different positions. Well, that's the Jordans, of course, come molded in one way. So I've cut off the heads and repositioned them and then add it to the model. And it really makes a difference, I believe. We're following the railroad around, but we're switching engines. The CP stopped at the fictitious town of Hartwell, and we pick up the UP passenger train coming out of Hartwell. It travels along the mountainous route, and we go through 3 tunnels with a snow shed in between. The interesting thing on the tunnels is that my wife and I were traveling along the Bighorn River in Montana, and I looked up and there was the 3 tunnels, so I had to model that. And as we follow along, we end up stopping at the town of Darcy. And there's the Paiute Springs big hotel. In the town of Darcy, we have cattle pens and a lot of action with horses and wagons. There's a firehouse with a SS Limited fire wagon. It's just a town that kind of built up all around the usage of the hotel, which was in theory a couple miles away from the town. The hotel itself is a kit, and the interesting part is it has 60 rocking chairs on the porches from a fellow in New York, Vector Cuts. And because I asked for 50, he ended up shipping me 60, saying anybody dumb enough to make 50 of my rocking chairs gets 10 more. So he was a very nice fellow, and it really adds to the scene. I do have two figures on the porch, which I kid, saying the one is standing like a picture of General Custer. So I always say that that's General Custer and Elizabeth Custer on vacation in 1875, a year before the battle at the Little Bighorn. The retaining walls are built from scale ties and then backfilled with dirt. They're fun to build. It takes a couple nights to build a 3-foot section of retaining wall, but it makes really fun modeling, and it certainly makes a detailed scene once you've finished it. And another thing that I've started doing is whenever I add wood loads to the steam engines, I just keep cutting wood, and then I put it in piles around the railroad, because back in 1870, there would be wood piles all over where they'd have to stop and fuel up. There's some intricate rock work. Those are all individual rocks placed. So you'd glue them and then backfill with dirt, glue, backfill. And I really like how it came out, because it really gives a fun deviation to other kind of walls, and very individualistic to do something like that. I have in my mind sometime to do a really long wall of individual rocks would be really quite fun. As we leave the town of Darcy, we immediately cross the big trestle. This is one of my favorite scenes on the railroad. The trestle itself, in HO scale feet, is about 420 feet long and about 180 feet tall. If you followed the Transcontinental Railroad, you know that the Union Pacific built a great trestle on its way up to Promontory, Utah for the meeting of the rails. So I really tried to make my trestle look similar to the great Union Pacific trestle there at Promontory, Utah. It's not exact, but it's fairly close. And this scene here is one of my favorite on the railroad. As you continue over the trestle, you notice that there's a nice farm up on the hillside with a great backdrop painted that extends the scene. A number of horses. I love the windmill. That was a really nice, intricate kit, very fine, detailed parts, and it's one of my little favorite models. The outbuildings scratch built, and a number of details just kind of add to the scene. If you notice in front here, there's a lone tree, and I built that tree, and it was so nice. I really liked its shape that I didn't want to put it in amongst the buildings, so I set it out here in this area where it's just kind of a lone tree standing by itself. The UP train heads into the town of Russell and stops to let off customers. After it makes its stop at Russell, it heads down in towards Ogden, and we've toured the whole railroad. Now, just on modeling, in the town of Russell, there's a 4-foot wall of individual blocks. The buildings are flats up against the wall, so it saves as much space as possible. There's a meat packing facility where you'll see some reefers set up there. And there's also, of course, being in the 1870s, a lot of horses and people milling around. Well, that's the end of your tour of my model railroad, and I certainly appreciate you watching and going through it. I would like to thank my friends who are an inspiration and to me when we work together on model railroads. My good friend Rob Spangler, many of you know him, painted the backdrops. And without his talent, it really would have changed the look of my railroad, and I appreciate him very much. And we have a Friday night group that gets together and we rotate around to different homes. And I enjoy going to their house because they are an inspiration to me and give me ideas on what to do in model railroading. The saying that model railroading is fun from Model Railroader certainly is true. I've spent a lifetime modeling and trying to get better and doing different things in model railroading. And it really is a way of life and a good time. And I appreciate the friends that I've made in this hobby. So with that, I'd like to sign off and say thank you for watching. I'm 7'3".